I was hesitant to take Dr. Lee with us at all. I knew if I'd been captured, he wouldn't have hesitated for a millisecond to dissect me alive, or use me as a guinea pig for some excruciating, hellish experiment. But he turned out to be more useful than I ever imagined. He sprinted down the long concrete hallway, leaving drops of blood from his streaming nose as he went. Agent Hudson and I followed him, side by side, both of us checking our backs constantly. The footsteps grew louder and closer by the second, and at any moment I expected to see dozens of hostiles streaming through the door. Dr. Lee turned suddenly into a random side room on the right. It looked no different from the other biological laboratories, except this one had no research subject strapped to the cold table. Dried blood saturated the surface and the floor all around it. I thought to myself what a health code violation that was. Then realized with some slight amusement that this country had probably never heard of a health code. The door slammed loudly open at the end of the hallway. But I heard no men shouting orders, no dogs barking, no sound of normal human interaction. A cold chill ran down my spine as the soft padding of sprinting footsteps came closer and closer to the room. Dr. Lee frantically ran to the corner, leaving some small random drops of blood dripping down from his wounds. I wondered whether the undead could smell the blood, whether they would follow the scent directly to us in a matter of moments. Dr. Lee fumbled with a hatchway in the corner. He pulled it open with a loud shrieking of metal. The small metal door was covered in rust and looked like it hadn't been opened since the Korean War. The sound of the groaning metal echoed down the hallway. So much adrenaline rushed through my body at that moment. I felt as if I could see every sound wave passing through the air. Time seemed to slow down as the first twisting, limping silhouettes came across the threshold. Without thinking, I pushed Dr. Lee hard into the hatchway, hearing him fall down the tunnel. I had no idea how far down it was, and at this point, I didn't care. I saw the open black mouths of the undead approaching me. At the front, I saw a little Korean boy, no older than 7 or 8, limping forwards with a swollen body. It looked like he had died of starvation, his stomach bulging over his naked sticks of legs. One foot dragging behind him, crooked and swollen. Blood streamed down his blank eyes from a deep slash in his skull. I could see the bone peeking out through the wound, like the moon shining out from behind the clouds. As lithe as dancers, twisting their bodies in inhumane ways, some dragging shattered legs behind them. This mass of rotting humanity came at us. Agent Hudson went into the tunnel next, giving me a quick glance before he dropped down. I pulled out an M67 fragmentation grenade from my suit, yanking the pin out quickly and rolling the grenade across the room. Then, I dropped down. The fall was longer than I had expected, and I didn't brace myself for it, landing heavily on my right ankle. I felt it twist, an explosion of pain running up through my leg. Then the rest of my body fell forwards, and I landed hard on Agent Hudson. He grunted. Jesus. Then the grenade went off. All I remember was thinking the world was collapsing around me, that the sun had gone supernova and blown apart the entire planet. But within moments, as heavy clouds of earth and stone fell from the ceiling. I felt something smash into the back of my head. My vision went white for a moment. Warm blood streaming down my back. Then, I was gone. "Can you hear me?" A voice asked from far away. I saw darkness. Felt something sticky on my torso and head. I groaned, not moving or responding for a few seconds. "Can you stand?" My vision started to return. I remembered what had happened, then sat up quickly, causing a lightning bolt of pain to sear through my head. I gritted my teeth, pressing both my hands against the side of my skull, as if I could keep the pain contained with simple pressure. Oh, damn. That really hurts. I saw Agent Hudson kneeling next to me in the dim light. Looking over, I saw Dr. Lee, sitting calmly next to me, his eyes revealing nothing. He might have been watching an infomercial on late-night TV for all the expression showing on his face. "Here," Agent Hudson said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a couple of tablets, pre-sealed in foil. "It's naproxen Aleve. It's not great, but it's the best we have, unless you want to try some of that etorphin." I smiled wryly at his joke, then unwrapped both capsules. Agent Hudson held out a flask that he had pulled out of nowhere, like a magic trick. He pressed the warm metal of it against my palm. "It's a little early to start drinking," I muttered, my head splitting in a horrible migraine. "Nope, it's Gatorade. I just use the flask because it's small, and it's metal, so maybe it'll stop a bullet one day." Can you imagine this thin, pathetic thing saving someone's life? I took a sip, handing it back to Agent Hudson. He didn't offer Dr. Lee any. In fact, he acted like the mad scientist didn't even exist. Groggily, I rose to my feet. Waves of nausea ran through my stomach, and I grabbed my head again with my hands, massaging the scalp to try to help the migraine. I felt a deep gash on the back of my head, and clotted sticky blood had dripped down beneath my camouflaged uniform. I looked at Agent Hudson and Dr. Lee. They seemed mostly fine, though they had cuts and scrapes all over their bodies. A thin covering of dirt and dust had settled on their faces, even covering Dr. Lee's thick black-framed glasses. He took them off and tried to clean them with the inside of his shirt. "Okay, Dr. Lee," Agent Hudson said in an icy tone, using his limited grasp of Korean to communicate. "This is your rodeo now. Lead the way." Dr. Lee did, rising quickly, his nose mashed to one side, his face covered in drying blood. He looked nothing at all like the professional, clean doctor we had found in the lab. "So why were you hiding?" At first, Dr. Lee said nothing, seeming to ignore the question. Then, in a monotone voice, looking straight ahead down the dark, cramped tunnel, he answered, starting to walk forward at a quick pace. We followed closely behind.
"I haven't been entirely truthful with you."
"No shit?" I asked, my voice seething with sarcasm. Agent Hudson gave me a nasty look. Then he motioned for Dr. Lee to continue,
The last time this happened was during the arduous march. Someone released the resurrection virus then too. I don't know who or why. We will probably never figure it out. But this time, I think I know who did it, or at least I can narrow it down to a few people. There is a group within the weapons complex who wants to overthrow Kim Jong-un by any means necessary. They hope to destabilize the country, leading to a revolution. These are the only people who, I believe, have the motive and opportunity. A few work on the same level of the building as me, dealing with level 4 and 5 bioweapons agents. They have tried recruiting me on multiple occasions. I refused, out of concern for my own life, but neither did I report them. They have connections, allegedly all the way up to Kim Jong-un's own sister, who was sending out feelers for what would happen if she had her brother killed and took the position upon herself. From what I know, she ultimately decided not to pursue that possibility at that moment. However, if an epidemic started in the country and led to millions of deaths, if people started dying in gruesome ways and rising from the dead, this could shock the people into action. Government has its own kind of inertia, in a way. It takes another powerful force to interrupt its forward march into the future. But any force that can make the population rise up is sufficient to lead to the destruction of the state.
The dirt tunnel started to turn sharply to the right, and at the end, I could see dim light coming in. As we got closer, I looked up, seeing an opening with a rickety ladder that let the moonlight stream in.
That hatch shouldn't be open,
Dr. Lee said, frowning. He began to climb up the ladder rapidly. Agent Hudson followed quickly behind him, his pistol grasped in one hand. He had it aimed at Dr. Lee in case he tried to run or trick us in some way. For all we knew, he could have assassins or snipers waiting for us to emerge from the hatchway above our heads. But I heard no movement. I followed up the ladder behind Agent Hudson, gripping my pistol in one hand as I slung the assault rifle over my back. I wanted to be able to fire at the first moment if necessary. Cold fingers seemed to tickle my back, goosebumps rising all over my skin. I knew something major was close, and I didn't want to reach that cataclysmic moment. I felt like a sleepwalker, striding blithely over the edge of a cliff. But even though I could see it coming, I felt unable to change my fate in any way. What I saw when I crossed over the last rung and entered into the dark world above stopped my breath. Hundreds of North Korean soldiers' corpses littered the field we found ourselves on. Most of their bodies burnt beyond recognition. Most still had their mouths open in silent screams. Their blackened skin cracked and broken from the immense heat. Their uniforms had been burned off, or in some cases fused to their melted skin. What happened here? I asked, a note of horror in my voice. Neither Agent Hudson nor Dr. Lee answered. They looked around with their wide eyes, and as if in answer to my question, I heard the shrieking of the rider from the edge of the woods nearby. He came galloping towards us in a blur, his skeletal horse shining white under the light of the moon. The hooves of the beast crushed the burnt bodies underfoot as it ran, the bulging black eyes of its rider staring straight through us, unblinking. His mouth hung open, showing a huge void. The air around it seemed to ripple as the eerie, ear-splitting scream emanated from his alien body, rising and falling in waves, echoing through the trees and spreading over the mountains. At that moment, I could barely hear orders being shouted in Korean, and reinforcements began to arrive, rushing through the trees that surrounded us and emerging into the field. They barely looked at us, focusing all their attention on the rider and his horse. They began to fire rapidly, and I pulled Agent Hudson and Dr. Lee towards an opening I saw in the human wave attack. Bullets whizzed overhead and past my ears, all aimed at the shrieking rider. One North Korean soldier ran past the others, throwing a grenade at the monster. The creature went quiet, all at once, as if shocked at this brazen move. The horse rode right over the grenade, and a second later it exploded. Agent Hudson, Dr. Lee, and I had reached the edge of the woods by this point, and I tackled Dr. Lee, instinctively pushing him and myself down. Next to us, Agent Hudson lunged, covering his head with his hands. Shrapnel and splinters of wood flew past us, a pillar of red flame rising up in the center of the field, obliterating the burnt corpses that littered the ground like leaves in an autumn forest. But when I looked back into the field, I saw the rider still approaching, completely unharmed by the bullets and the explosion. He jumped off his horse as the soldiers closed in around him. Hovering in the air a few inches above the ground, he began to spin around, shrieking his inhuman cry again. And white light poured from his body, as thin as a razor. 4 streams of blinding energy shot out of his chest as he levitated in the air, rotating slowly in circles. The streams of deadly light hit the bodies of the soldiers that ran forwards around him, firing their guns and yelling orders. As soon as the pulsating currents of light hit them, they immediately went quiet, their eyes widening, their mouths open. After it had passed, their bodies would slide apart, cut in half at the chest as if by a laser. In horror, I saw the flesh on their bodies begin to burn and melt, ripping apart as the light cut through the skin. Within seconds, every person standing in the field was dead, their dead bodies falling on those of their comrades underneath. The screams of the rider faded away as he lowered himself back to the ground, his sharp legs digging through the corpses of the men underfoot and into the dirt beneath. From the opposite side of the field, I saw fresh reinforcements streaming in, some nearly tripping on the thousands of bodies that now littered nearly every square inch of the field, sometimes 2 or 3 deep. The rider paid them no heed, walking back over to his horse and mounting it with an alien grace. He started to ride towards us, the North Korean soldiers yelling orders at him and opening fire. However, It ended as quickly as it started when thousands of undead began to rush in from the surrounding forest. The mass of rotting flesh overtaking them like a stream rolling over a pebble. Go. I whisper screamed at Dr. Lee and Agent Hudson. Dr. Lee was directly in front of me. I put my pistol directly against the back of his head. And if you try anything, I swear to God, I will blow your brains out before you even know what hit you. I'm not in a mood to be fucked with, got it? He nodded, his eyes gleaming underneath his thick glasses. He turned away from me and started going at a jog, staying close behind Agent Hudson. Once we had given some distance between ourselves and the field, I turned, seeing no sign of the rider. Agent Hudson pulled out his electronic compass, sighing when he saw the coordinates. He pulled out a satellite phone from his pocket and dialed a long string of digits. After a few seconds, he said, "We're 15 minutes out from the extraction point. One in tow. Level 5 situation is in progress near the border. We need immediate backup." Without waiting for a response, he hit the end button and shoved it back into his pocket. He looked back at Dr. Lee with pure and utter hatred. "You know," he said as we began jogging through the woods, going up and down mountain trails and around huge rocks and ancient trees. "My grandfather was in the Korean War. Ray Hudson. He was captured and tortured by scumbags like this guy." He pointed a trembling finger at Dr. Lee. Agent Hudson did not look good. Even under the dim light of the moon and stars, I could see his neck wound had turned a sickly purplish color. He pulled out his pistol and put it to Dr. Lee's head, still shaking with anger, or maybe something else. "I'll kill you right now, I swear to God. Give me one reason not to, you bastard. I'll scatter your brains all over this place. You understand me, motherfucker?" Dr. Lee nodded, his eyes wide with terror. "Agent Hudson, what in God's name are you doing? Lower your weapon. This hostage is valuable." He kept shaking, his finger tightening on the trigger. I braced myself for the shot, for the back of Dr. Lee's head to dissolve in a spatter of gore and bone fragments. But at the last moment, Agent Hudson holstered his pistol. He slung his assault rifle back around and motioned with it for us to keep going. I wondered, what had I just seen? He seemed like he was losing control in some pivotal way. But he was also my superior. This was only my first mission, and who was I to tell an experienced agent how to do his job? But it still felt wrong. Finally, we saw the watchtowers in the distance, poking up above the trees as they went in a line all up and down the looming mountains. From here, I could see for miles. In the Chinese direction, I saw countless lights from cars, houses, and businesses. But when I looked over to the North Korean side, I saw only darkness for as far as the eye could see. "Just up here," Agent Hudson said, pointing to the other side of the guard tower. I saw the barbed wire stretching across our path, tightened around the trees and pulled taut to mark the border. I could easily cut it with the clippers on my belt. But as I walked up to it, checking to my left and right, a swarm of activity started behind us. Leaves rustled and twigs cracked as many feet trampled the ground. Through the trees, I saw dozens of North Korean soldiers emerge, pointing their guns at us and shouting orders. Dr. Lee put his hands straight up in the air.
Please, these men kidnapped me. I think they're agents of the Imperial American government. Help me!
I saw my life flash before my eyes. I didn't know whether to put my hands up or go out fighting. Turning, I saw Agent Hudson put his hands up, his rifle falling limply from the strap wrapped around his neck. He winked at me. Following his lead, I dropped my rifle and put my hands up as well. The North Korean men, running forwards in their brownish-gray uniforms, pulled out handcuffs to arrest us. Then, sniper fire rang all around us. I ducked to the ground, covering my head as the face of the nearest soldier exploded. The others quickly followed, their chests and heads disintegrating under the impact of the hail of bullets. And soon, it was silent again. I took my hands off my head, raising it slowly, seeing the still bodies of all the soldiers laying sprawled on the dirt. I looked across the border and saw Agent Stryker, walking forwards in his immaculately pressed black suit, surrounded by a team of men in camouflage. They snipped through the barbed wire in seconds and approached us. Nearby, I heard helicopters descending. I looked over and saw Dr. Lee, still alive, looking shell-shocked and confused. Agent Stryker told him in Korean to put his hands behind his back, and they handcuffed him there on the spot, pushing him towards one of the helicopters. Agent Hudson and I followed wordlessly behind, crossing over the border. I saw men climbing down from the trees in ghillie suits, sniper rifles slung around their necks. Wordlessly, we began to enter the black helicopters that landed. Agent Stryker sat in the one we entered, waiting. As soon as we sat down, he congratulated us on a mission well done, and especially on capturing Dr. Lee, who would provide invaluable information to his interrogators. I just felt grateful to be alive after the horrors I had seen. But as we got evacuated from that hellhole, I looked over at Agent Hudson and saw his eyes, blank and lifeless. They looked right through me as we took off. Eyes like those of a statue.